Welcome back to Machynlleth. In this episode we're going to be dealing with the scenery at the top of the cliff area. Get this out of the way because it's going to involve a lot of leaning over the front and middle areas of the layout. So I want to do that before we start detailing those areas. So we'll be doing the basic ground level, all the greenery and a long section of fencing at the top. As you can see behind me, it's already done. That's just because I forgot to record an intro section for this video. So there we are. So there's a little area at the top of the cliff there, getting a bit wider further down here. Right down into the corner here. As you can see, quite a bit of a reach. I'll be getting the lower yard out to improve the situation, and also there's a fence that needs to run all the way along the top here. I've printed out, sorry, not printed, laser cut out a couple of hundred fence posts, and I'll need to plant them as well. So the process is going to be I need to tidy up the edges of the paint, the undercoat paint there. Then we'll be covering the area with a layer of soil, which is a mixture of fine sieved soil and tile grout, and then static grass over the top, and then a few bits of scenic scatter and bushes and what have you over the top of that. So I'm going to crack on and try and get all these buildings up without damaging them. Okay, so I've removed anything that's likely to get damaged in this process. I'm leaning over the baseboard, so I've got all the buildings and signals off with relatively little in the way of casualties. They're all stacked up here out of the way. And the baseboard looks a bit like it did 2 years ago. So next we're going to get on, prepare the soil. I'll show you how I do that. Right, here we've got a tray of soil. This is soil. It's not actually out my garden. My garden's soil's got a lot of stones and a lot of compost in it, so it's not ideal. I've got this from a bit of common land close to where I live, and it's, when you break it down, it's very nice, fine and sandy. But as you can see, we've got lots of these little chunks here that need breaking down. So I should just say that obviously I've dried this out, but I've also put it in the oven on a high heat for about, I don't know, half an hour or so, just to try and kill anything living in it. I'm not necessarily talking about bugs. I'm thinking more along the lines of spores and seeds and things like that, and things that, you know, might germinate on the layout. So I'm just going to get a sieve out of the kitchen and just grind all this soil. And there we are. I'm getting a nice fine soil deposit, and then we'll just get rid of all the rubbish. So this is going to take a bit of time to do all this lot. So I'll come back when I've done that. Right, there we are. That took about 15 minutes. So got a nice little ice cream tub full of very nice fine soil here. Not much waste. A few little stones there. It's quite dark. That will get sorted out with the next stage, because I'm going to mix this with some sort of pale beigey tile grout. It gives it a little bit of a firmer texture, a bit more robust once it's glued onto the layout. So here we have some tile grout. It's this sort of beigey colour. I'm just going to mix this in There's not really any volume guides, just until it looks about right, really. So stir that in, and then I think once it's started, I'll get it into a plastic bag, sealable plastic bag, and give it a good shake around. See, that's paling off quite nicely. Don't forget that'll get darker again once you apply some glue to it. That's why I'm trying to pale it off a little bit. And there we are, that's nice and evenly mixed in now. Nice uniform colour. Some very fine bits, a few little lumpy bits. But there's nothing in there more than about 1 millimetre in diameter. That's going to be perfect. And there's loads there. That took me, well, I mean, total preparation time, including going and getting it. It's probably taken me a few hours, but it's once it's dried out, it's taken me 15 minutes, and that's going to be loads. Might even last me for the entire layout. And if you can make a big batch in one go, it'll give you uniformity over the whole layout. You won't end up with patches one colour and a patch of very slightly different shade. So we'll start getting that down now. Okay, we need 3 things for the next stage. We need neat PVA, we need to make some scenic cement, wet water, whatever people call it, which is a mixture of PVA, water and washing up liquid, and we need some slightly diluted isopropyl alcohol. So I mean, the scenic cement side of things, it's not rocket science. It's been well documented before. The approximate mix is about 30% PVA glue and 70% water with a drop of washing up liquid in. So I tend to mix it in slowly rather than pouring the whole lot in one go, otherwise you tend to end up with a gloopy bits. So that's probably about 50%. I tend not to add the detergent until later, otherwise it tends to foam up quite a lot. So keep stirring that. That should be plenty to be getting on with for a little while. And then just a drop of detergent, washing up liquid. Try and go for a clear one rather than the coloured fancy ones with a scent in and things like that. These eco ones tend to not have colouring in them, and they're not gonna leach the colours into your final layout. So there we are. That's probably about the right consistency. And I'll put some neat PVA in that. We'll need more than that, but we'll get that out for the time being. And this is a nice, very fine spray. It's one of the Boots travel accessories for decanting your stuff into your 100 mils, so that you can only have going through airport security. But it's got a lovely, nice, fine spray on it. So this is just bog standard isopropyl alcohol with mixed 50% with tap water. Right, so got everything ready. Put some paper down over the track bed so we don't damage that. This is the area off to the side of the screen. I'll show you in a minute we're going to be doing first. So I've got my PVA glue neat, my watered down PVA, we've got some soil mix, isopropyl alcohol mix. I've got these two little things to make shakers out with, an old pair of tights, an elastic band. So I'll just put a bit in there, a little bit at a time. Pair of tights goes over the top and your elastic band is snapped, but you can hold it in place anyway. So I'm just going to start with a layer of neat PVA glue, and it doesn't need to be thick, you can spread it around quite nicely. Work in small areas so it doesn't dry out too much. A little bit tricky to get to this corner. A smaller brush, get in there and bring it up to the edge of the ash ballast that's been in for a while. So if we get that in a nice uniform layer, not too many thick bits, and we get our shaker and just shake the soil over the glue in a nice even layer. Try to overlap an area at the edge without the soil on for your next bit of glue. A layer of glue might seem not so apparent at the moment, but when you move on to an area that is on a steep slope, it just keeps it in place. Otherwise it all just slides down the slope end up with a big pile of it at the bottom. So we've got a nice area of this fairly uniform soil. We get our isopropyl alcohol spray. This will break the surface tension and allow the glue to the scenic cement to soak in nicely. So just a light spray. The stuff evaporates quite quickly. I've just got a little dropper here. Let me see how that's spreading out into the soil quite nicely. It's pooling a little bit towards the bottom, gravity. Bit more spray. But hopefully you can see how that's spreading through all of our soil. Might need a little bit extra. Okay, so I'm going to carry on around the layout. There's a bit that's pulled there. Get a piece of kitchen roll and just soak up that extra glue there. Don't really want it to pull too thickly. Leave a little pond at the bottom of our Just gently dab it on there. Okay, so I've done a section and I've let that dry, and I'm not happy. Things don't always go to plan, do they? It's a lot darker than I was expecting. There's some lighter areas here, but as the glue was drying, I could see that it was dark, so I sprinkled some of the dry mix over the top of the drying glue, so these bits aren't actually stuck down. That's the sort of colour I want to end up with when it's dry, but obviously the PVA is darkening down the soil mix quite a bit, so I think there's a lesson learnt there, is try some test patches, if that's what I'm going to do next. I've been out, the soil around here is very, very dark in itself, so I've been out trying to find a little bit of lighter soil, which is currently drying out. I'm going to try a mix with a higher proportion of the coloured tile grout, see if that pales it off. I'll try some little sections and see where we end up after that. Okay, so we've done a little bit of trials. For reference, this is neat, the grout that I've been using. That was an experiment to have a look at making sort of worn tyre tracks in the sort of lower yard area, which I'll get onto at some point. So I've just done a couple of trials. That was this mix, which I made earlier, mixed up 50-50 with some more of the grout, and this was some new soil that I got that looked a bit lighter, mixed 50-50 with the grout, and I think that's the sort of colour that I want to go to for the soil underneath. So I'm going to take this lot here, mix it 50-50 with the grout. I don't think I'm going to need to use all of it, and have another go at getting some soil down. That's the second attempt dried. It's a bit patchy, and although this is all going to get covered up by grass, there's areas where I want patchy grass with some soil showing through it, so I want to be able to get it right while I've still got the opportunity to change and try different things. I'm going to give a wash of a brown paint and sprinkle a little bit of the neat earth on top of that as it's drying, and see whether that looks any better. Okay, so I think I've solved it just with a wash of this is B&Q Elegant Earth, and I've just made a wash of about, I don't know, 20% paint, a bit of Mod Podge just to make sure any loose bits are glued down properly, and Mod Podge dries with a matte finish, and water, and I'm just been dabbing it on letting it soak in a bit and then wiping it off with some kitchen roll, and lo and behold, it's coming out brown instead of that sort of patchy grey. I'm just sort of dabbing it and feathering it a bit at the edges. I've still got a little bit of bleeding where it's darkening off the ash ballast. So just put it on like that, and then just dab down on the road, dab it away like that, and I'll show you a bit that's dried off when we're done here. Let's see how it's coming. It's still a little bit patchy, but it's much more brown, earthy colour than that sort of funny grey patchy that we're getting with the other method I was using. I don't know what's gone wrong. I've done this before using earth, and it came out a lovely sort of pale earthy colour. I have moved house since I last did it, and I think the earth around here is a lot darker than the earth that I was using in my previous layout, so I think that's probably all it boils down to. So that's an area on the top of the cliff where that technique's dried off, and as you can see it's a much nicer brown colour. It's still patchy, it's going to get covered over with grass, but actually at last it looks like soil rather than some sort of grey dust. Okay, I'm going to start putting down a bit of green. I'm going to put down a base coat of Woodland Scenics blended fine turf to put underneath the static grass. I need to make up some scenic glue, so I'm starting off with Mod Podge. I'm using Mod Podge now rather than PVA because it dries matte, so we don't get the shiny effect. I'm going to make up a good volume. It's about 1/3 Mod Podge, so I think that's probably a little bit much. It's about 1/3 Mod Podge and 2/3 water. Just put it in a jam jar, give it a good shake. I'm going to put some washing up liquid in it once it's well mixed. Don't put the washing up liquid in straight away before you start shaking, otherwise you just end up with a jam jar full of foam. Okay, just gonna put a bit of scenic glue onto the steeper sort of embankment section here, just so that the turf sticks onto the embankment, but the rest of it's all fairly flat. So I've decanted it into just one of the Woodland Scenic shakers, and I just want a light layer. I particularly want to get it into the back corner of the baseboard where it joins the back scene, because that's quite a difficult area to get the static grass into. I don't want a thick layer, just a fine layer. Bits showing through will be fine. So all the green scatters had a chance to dry now. In fact, it's had a week, so I've been away on holiday. But as you can see, there's an area where the scenic glue has bled into the ash ballast area, leaving a bit of an unsightly line. So I'm going to have to try and cure that. I think what I'm going to try and do is by dry brushing some Mod Podge into the area and then just blending some of this ash, which is dark grey tile grout, and some of the soil blending in across there. If I use sort of a dry brush Mod Podge rather than a dilute, it's not going to bleed into the existing ground cover too much. It's done it in a couple of places, but actually further along here it's much more presentable. I don't know why that bit was more successful than this. So it's done it there, and then again on the other side. So It's got some Mod Podge which I'm just going to sort of dry brush over the gap, the transition. Hopefully with it being Mod Podge it won't, not dilute, it won't bleed. And I've got a brush, I've got some, this is some of the soil. So if we just dry brush that onto the soil side of it, and with another brush, this is some of the tile grout, and then we just blend it in. Hopefully I'm going to fairly nice gentle transition between the two colours. So I've hoovered off the excess and brushed it in and blended it, and I think you'll agree that looks like a much better result. Okay, so I'm going to work out how many fence posts I need to do the entire back of this bit of the layout. I've got myself a piece of string meticulously measured to 1 metre long with a loop at each end. So at one end I put a drawing pin through the loop and just put drawing pins anywhere where there's going to be curves. So that is 1 metre of fencing with a spacing of 40 millimetres, which is 10 feet between each fence post. That's 25 fence posts needed for that section. And I'm going to carry on all the way around the top of the cliff face, working out how many fence posts I'm going to need to cut with my laser cutter. Right, at last it's time to start putting some static grass down. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because it's something that just brings the layout to life. Going to be doing the area at the top of the cliff that I was working on earlier. It requires a little bit of thought because it's going to be done as 2 strips either side of a fence. So in front of the fence it's going to be railway land, which is going to be sort of rough, different textured grass, and behind that is going to be a field. Now, one thing we all know about Wales is that fields are full of sheep and they're going to crop the grass quite low. So there's going to be quite 2 different textures of grass, and trying to get that right either side of the fence line might be a little bit tricky. So I'll show you where we're up to. So I've marked out with some pins and a piece of string the line of the fence. So behind that is going to be our nice cropped grass, and in front of that, on the edge of the embankment and running into this siding area, is going to be much rougher grass, thinning out to sort of patchy grass right in the growing on the sort of ash ballast area. So I've done that all the way around, and I'll show you what we've got. So I got an embankment pack, they call it, from WWS Scenics. Now this is new to me. I've used other static grass before. I've never used WW Scenics, but I saw them at a show. I was quite impressed. So this is what I got in the embankment pack. They use what they call a layering method, starting off with 2 millimetre grass and then building up with longer grasses. So that's what you get with the pack: spring green, autumn dead, wild meadow and patchy in various lengths. I also bought slightly duller green they call muddy grass. I thought that might be a little bit little bit green and in your face for what I want. So I think I might mix the spring and the muddy grass together to dull it down a little bit. Also, I'm going back to my old favourites, which is the green scene grasses. This is 4mm spring grass, which I've used on my previous layout and I was really pleased with it, and a little bit of 6mm as well. And in the background I've just got a random pack of dead grass. So I'm going to make a 50-50 mix of the spring and the muddy grass. Just got a normal Ziploc freezer bag. Put some spring 2mm in there, and about 50-50 with some of the muddy grass. Get a bit of air in there to give it some space to move. And the Ziploc doesn't want to close. There we go. And then just give that a good shake around to get somewhere between these two colours. Glue I'm going to use is again Mod Podge because it dries matte. Make sure you get, there's two types, there's matte, medium and gloss. So this dries matte, so it shows through the grass. It won't show up as shiny. So I'm going to let that down with a bit of water. Probably just about 80% glue. That's probably a bit much. 80% glue and 20% water. Give it a good mix around. Again, I don't want it so wet that it's going to bleed like it did before. I think that's probably still a little bit wet. Put a bit more in. There we are, that's a bit more like it. So yeah, if I was to use PVA on these bits where it's the grass is going to be sort of patchy growing into the ground texture, you start seeing shiny coming through. So these are the static grass applicators I've got. This is WWS Scenics standard applicator, and I've got a detail applicator as well, because I think that'd be helpful doing little patches of grass around buildings and things like that later on. So we'll just fill that up. So just simply unscrew the top. Fill it up. Fill it up with a few good sized pinches. Do it over the bag. This stuff just gets everywhere. Screw it on. So start putting the glue on. Just dab it on. Spread it around. I'm going to get it right into the corners where the back seam comes up, so we don't have any gaps. You may be wondering why I put the string there for the fence instead of actually just putting the fence in. When you use the layering technique, you need to use a spray adhesive, which would obviously get all over the fence, and you'd end up with a fence covered in grass as well. So, turn our applicator on. The way static grass works is this puts a positive charge on the nylon fibres, and you need a negative charge. So if we just put this little crocodile clip onto the pin that's in the glue, that'll provide us with a nice negative charge, and we just start shaking away till we've got some coverage. So as you can see, it's quite difficult to get with the big grass applicator to get into the baseboard edges. So I'm going to use the small applicator to try and fill that gap. That seems to be working quite nicely. Just tapping it on the board to get the fibres out. Sorry about the noise. So I've left a little bit on the end here to the side so we don't overlap completely for the next set of the next layer of glue. So where we want it to be a bit patchy here, rather than having a nice straight edge, I'm just going to just stipple the glue on. As if the grass is encroaching. So, a bit more grass in our hopper. Give it a shake about. We're getting a good coverage there. Now, I want some longer grass in this bit in the edge. So, and I think using the layering spray we might get a bit of trouble there. Get the sort of patchy effect that I'm looking for. So in the small hopper, I'm out of shot, I'm afraid. I'm just putting a bit of the spring 4mm in the small applicator. And that should fall and stick in between the glue on the I'm going to go with a little bit of patchy grass. This is dead actually. This is dead grass. So I'm trying to get that to fall into in between the other fibres and still stick to the glue before it dries. Okay, I'm just going to hoover up the excess. The hoover with the foot of a pair of tights over it to save anything that comes back, so excuse the noise a second. And if you turn that out, you get a little pile of random stuff. That will build up and actually amount to quite a lot by the end of the process. So the next stage, and why they call it the layering system, is using this layering spray that they do. Spray that on top of the short grass and start adding layers of longer grass in different colours. Now, I don't want the spray to go over all the back scene and give me a hairy back scene, so I've just got a piece of card here to protect the back scene. See the glue making it look paler. So for the meadow sheep eaten grass at the back, I've got some of the green scenes 4mm grass, and we'll just get some of that on there. Put a bit on the front as well. Do a bit more up here. Okay. Now I'm going to start putting in some different colours. So we've got some wild meadow in 6mm. Don't want much of that. And I'm going to work along the, put a bit more spray on, work along the embankment and the railway side of this. And you can see how hairy that piece of string is getting. That's why I didn't really want to have my fence in place. So just a little bit of colour there. Now this is the bit he recommends doing that makes it look, you have to be a bit brave, is you start messing it up with your fingers like this to give it some texture, and then we're going to put another layer on. So just at the edge of where the fence is, and on the embankment side of the fence. So to me that looks really terrible, but I've seen videos on it and it comes out really well. So we go back to our 2mm grass. And protect the back seam. Get the layering spray in. So we cover that with another layer of 2mm grass. Run out already. Get out that end. And And another spray. And now I've got some longer grass of different colours, different tones. Give it that sort of patchy effect, just working the area on the embankment side. You can see the effect there. Different lengths, it all seems to be standing up nice and straight. It's a bit sort of patchy, thicker grass, thinner grass. It's blending quite well into the edge of the ground texture without too much discoloration from bleeding. So that's what I'm happy with, and hopefully you can see that there's a bit of a contrast between what's inside the sheep field and what's outside the sheep field. I don't want to take the fake fence off yet until I've worked all the way around, because otherwise I'll lose the tension all the way around. So I'm going to carry on round and see how I get on. So I've made it all the way up to the other end of the cliff face. We're coming down into the yard. I sort of abandoned the WWS layering system, making marks in the wet glue with your fingers to create a bit of texture. I found that the effect I was getting was quite coarse, and the grass seemed very, very long for 4mm scale. Maybe it's okay for larger scales, but I just wasn't really happy with it. But I still want to get a slightly sort of clump effect. So I'm going to try here in this area. It's a bit shadowy, I'm afraid. I've glued down some woodland Celix foliage just to try and break up the evenness of the ground in this area, to give me hopefully a bit of texture and clumpiness in the grass. So we'll see how that pans out. I think we're going to have to dab the glue on rather than brushing it. I have tried to glue this stuff down, but it's still a little bit loose. So rather than painting the glue on, I'll be dabbing it on to try and maintain this sort of slightly uneven texture. That trial bit around the corner there, it seems to be working quite well. So as I say, just dabbing the glue on, and a lot of it sticking to the brush, but that doesn't really matter too much. It sort of comes back off again in little clumps. As you can see, I've had a bit of an issue with the glue bleeding when I put the earth texture down. It's bled into the road, which I'm going to have to address again at a later date. I don't want too much bleeding going on there. As you can see, it's creating these little humps of foliage, which is then subsequently resulting in little humps of grass, which is the effect that I'm trying to achieve. Again, as it's sort of going into the ash ballast area, just a few little dots to make clumps rather than having an abrupt edge. You can see there, I think, these little clumps of the foliage making lumps and bumps in the glue. I'm still sort of following the layering technique. So I'll start now with some 2mm grass there. As a base, I think you can see these little lumpy areas coming through. So that was a 2mm WWS grass. Now we'll have a bit of, this is 4mm Green Scenes Spring Green. Pop that over the top. And then I've got this, which are sort of affectionately called floor sweeping. So whenever I hoover anything up, that's got a bit of everything in it, as well as I've added a few extra of these 6mm Wild Meadow, 4mm Autumn and 4mm Dead, just to give it a little bit of a bit more texture. And we can pop that over the top. So the effect is subtle, but it's much more what I'm after. It seems much more scale to me. I'm going to put a little bit more just down by the road there. Glue is showing through a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to hoover that up. So I don't know whether this will pick up on camera. But that seems to give a nice sort of slightly clumpy texture, rather than this up here is more just straight application onto the glue. So I finished the grass to a condition which I'm satisfied. I've got some rougher grass here for this side of the boundary fence, and some neater grass towards the back that will have been cropped short by sheep. It was a little bit bright and shiny, so I toned it down with a little bit of a wash of a sort of a pale yellowy green, using the airbrush just to try and blend it in a little bit better with the green in the back. So, you know, it's not great, it's a little bit better further round in this area. In fact, on the camera it actually seems to look a bit more noticeable than it does in real life, but it's got a nice sort of variated appearance to it. So it's time to get on with planting this fence at last. These are the fence posts that I've designed on Lightburn and cut out of 1.5mm birch ply, getting 54 fence posts per sheet, each with the requisite number of holes for the wire as per GWR fence post. The only slight issue is, I think on the real fence post the angle at the top would actually be at 90 degrees to the direction of the wires going across. Unfortunately that's not really possible to achieve with the laser cutter, so that's a little bit of a compromise, but I don't think it'll show too much. So I need to do some calculations, find out how many of these I need, and I will pop them out. This is what they look at once they've been popped out of the the waste popped out. And we'll get them painted up. Much easier to paint while they're still on the sprue like this. So no need for an expensive paint here. Back to my B&Q testers. This one's Stone Age. Looking at the black and white pictures from the era, the fence post appears to be more of a grey colour than the sort of dark browny black of freshly creosoted fence posts that seems to be seem to appear on most layouts. So this is the one we'll go with. And I don't want to fill all these holes up with paint. I'll try and get it on a piece of text newspaper so that you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to do a bit more of a dry brush. It's probably going to need a few coats on the side. of the posts because they're obviously burnt a bit black. From the laser cutting process. Managed to fill up some holes there. You can always pick them out with a needle later on. So there we are. That's the sort of colour we're going to end up with. Right, there we are. 216 fence posts painted and cleared the holes out with a little piece of wire. Took a bit of time to get that all sorted, but I think it's going to be worth it in the end. So I've got lots of sprues of fence posts all painted in a nice sort of concretey grey sort of colour, and all the holes are nice and painted, so I'll be able to get some wire through it. And when I say wire, I'm going to be using this. Now, a lot of the fence posts supplied by manufacturers come with some sea fishing line. I am a fisherman, and the stuff that comes with it is very overscale. It's probably about 0.4 millimeters in cross section, and the breaking strain of that's probably about 15-20 pounds. This is Machynlleth brand fishing line, and this is the 1.5 pound breaking strain, and it's got a diameter of 0.1 millimeters. And as you can see by the colour of the line, it's actually a nice brown colour, so it looks like a naturally rusted wire fence when it's applied, but it's going to be a real fiddle. You probably can't see that. If I try and measure it with some calipers, probably won't even register. No, it doesn't even register on my calipers. So I'm going to be cutting these off. I've made a little jig here to hold 5 fence posts in place at a time, so that you can thread the line through 5 fence posts at a time rather than having to do each one individually. So I've got my first fence post I've threaded through. Probably can't see a piece of fishing line onto the bottom hole, and I will just hold that in place with the tiniest dab of super glue. Make sure that doesn't untie, just with a simple overhand knot. So I've got my little jig here. I've measured out, I need 165 centimeters of fence for this board, so I've measured about 180. Now ideally it should work, it has worked for me before, if you can get the line into the bottom hole of your first fence post. If you keep it straight, there we are, it goes through 5 at a time. So there we are, that's the first 5 on a string. There we go. So I'm going to carry on there. I need 67 fence posts, each with 7 or 8 holes, wires to fill. So I'll carry on doing that. Okay, so after about an hour off camera, I've threaded all the fishing wire through those holes. It was actually a bit easier than I thought it was going to be. Don't get me wrong, it was a fiddle. You just work methodically, but once you've got the first couple of wires in, that holds all the other fence posts in place, and the rest of the line goes through the holes quite easily with just a little bit of twiddling. I've done it all off camera. You'd never you'd never have been able to see what I was doing on the camera. I think it's far too detailed and long-winded as well. So I'll show you where we are now. So here we've got our row of fence posts all nicely threaded through. I hope you can see the wires, and I've got these little clips just holding the rest of the line in a nice straight line, so we don't end up in a massive great big bird's nest tangle. So finally we can actually get this onto the layout. So we keep on going round. You might be able to see a bit better in this area how we progress. The challenge is to make sure your wires don't get twisted. A little dab of glue. Try not to get glue on the wire, because otherwise you won't be able to tension it right at the end. So there we are, we've reached the end of the baseboard. So I'll stop there. I don't want to put wire across baseboard joint, although it's not a layout that I'm anticipating taking apart. You never know if there's going to be a house move or something like that. So yeah, I'll stop there. I've not tensioned the wires yet. They're reasonably tight, but I've not tensioned them yet. Because if you do it before the glue dries, you pull all the fence posts over that go around a bend. So we'll leave that there. We'll go and thread some more fence posts. As you notice, I threaded more posts onto the wires than I needed. You never know when you're going to end up with a mishap, and it's much easier to take them off at the end than it is to try and re-thread them once they're on the board. So we'll leave that to dry while we go and thread some more posts. So the fence posts are all nicely glued in now, so I'm just going to start teasing the wires nice and straight and tight all the way around. So the final thing now, I've teased it all around, is to finish off and keep them tight. So just pulling all the wires tight in one go, and I'm going to run a blob of super glue, a good generous blob of super glue down the end there, so it soaks into all the holes. Leave that for a second to go off. Now if I let go of that, that should all stay tight, and I can just trim back these ends with a pair of scissors. Got this lovely little pair of craft scissors, and there we go. I don't know how well you can see the wires nice and tight. Okay, so our fencing is complete. I must admit it's taken me days to do this, spread out with some days off, but the final effect, I think, is excellent. I don't know if you can see there, you can see the effect of the wires against the sky. We go all the way along the cliff top, back down to the cattle dock siding behind the station building. I've put some little matches where we're going to be putting our trees. There's a little stand of conifers there. I've done a little video on these quick and easy to make HelloFresh trees. There'll be a link at the end of that to this video. I'm going to plant those, but underneath conifers you don't tend to get fresh lush grass, so I'm going to add an area of dead sort of brown tree debris, dead leaves, etc. Using a blend of dead leaves, which I'll simply put through a blender. So I'm going to start with putting down some extra firm hold hairspray in the areas that I want it, and then just start to sprinkle some of this on. Making it sort of more dense in the middle of the tree area and a bit less towards the edges. There we go. I'll let that dry off. Just to soften that brown, I'm going to put a bit of Woodland Scenics earth. Again, just sprinkle that over the top. That will do. Again, another squirt of spray. Have to be a bit careful not to blow it all away with the spray. Just a light spray will do. And now I'm going to put some areas of weeds in. I've got these foliage mats, again from Woodland Scenics. There's a medium and a dark green. That's a fibrous product that's impregnated with their fine scatter, and you can just pull out areas of it like that and just put it down like that. Again, hold it in place with a good squirt of hairspray. Probably the smaller these areas, the better. Just little patches of stuff here and there. So now we can start planting our Hello Fresh trees. Simple enough. Just a good dollop of just normal white glue. Remove your matchstick and then poke it in. Have it standing upright. And there we are. Do a little close up for the effect of that. There we are. So hopefully you can see we've got a little bit of the original dirt showing through on this vertical area, our static grass. Hopefully you can see underneath the trees. It looks like a sort of a dark brown area where the dead foliage is lying. We've got our various different shades of like low level weeds poking through our static grass, just the effect that I was after. I've just arranged a selection of bushes that I've retrieved from my old layout. These are made with rubberized horsehair, just coated in the Woodland Scenics turf. They need a little bit of rescuing. They've gone a little bit bald, so that's easy enough to do. So this is just good old-fashioned rubberized horsehair. It's been sprayed to make it a bit browner. It's getting a bit bald around the edges, so again, just gonna really soak it in hairspray, dip it in some fresh greenery, really rub that in, get it to stick properly, especially around the bottom. And once it's on, give it a bit of a spray, put that aside. Okay, I'm working my way along, blending the fence in with a bit of undergrowth and weeds either side of it. Remembering we've got sheep pasture beyond, it's going to be fairly well cropped, the odd patch here and there, and a bit of bushiness more on this side than the other side. There'll be some encroachment through the fence. You've got to make sure that it doesn't stop dead on the other side of the fence. So I'm using this, which is the medium green foliage, running out of that now. Green grass fine turf, and then sprinkling over a little bit of green blend just to highlight where the light will be sort of reflecting off the tops of the leaves, just to lighten it up a bit. So I mean, tearing off a short piece of the foliage like that, spraying on a bit of my old hairspray, getting the foliage, working it into the bottom of the fence, just patting it down, so a little bit on one side, and then tear off a very fine strip to put on the other side. Working it into the bottom of the fence. It does have a habit of sticking to your fingers. And a layer of spray, and we'll just get some of the fine turf and just blend that in on both sides. A few little patches here and there, and this is the blended turf, which is much lighter, and just sprinkling from a height just to take the darkness out of it. A few little patches out in the sheep pasture, and then a fine mist over the top. Don't go in too close, you'll just blast everything out of the way. And just working our way along the fence like that. So I've been all along the top of the cliff face now with a combination of grass and then the fine leaf foliage and mid and light green with a little dusting of weeds over the top of it. Been along and hoovered it all up, all the spare up. All the way down, some bushes up here to blend with the back scene, into the field right to the end. So also I've been going along the cliff face, adding little bits of grass on all the sort of sort of flat level areas. And I'll show you just how I do that. It's fairly simple. This is our bit of cliff face I'm going to work on next. Just look at where, you know, the dust and soil might settle and give a purchase for some grass, and just with a bit of Mod Podge just make some just little blobs. I prefer sort of little tufts rather than large areas. That'll do for this section. And then I'm using this. It's got some stones in it from where it's hoovered up, but basically this is my sweeping, so it's got a mixture of grass in there. I'm using the fine applicator from Machynlleth with its little hopper. So I'm going to put a bit of the sort of mixed sort of grass, mainly about 4mm, different shades, and then get some out, pinch as well as the 2mm spring grass. Try and get in nice and close. It's quite difficult to get this stuff to come out at first. It comes out easier once the hopper's a bit more empty. But just tapping the hopper anywhere where I've put a blob of glue. And there you can see just a nice subtle grass tuft effect. So now I'm just going back along, just putting a little, just touching the tops of the grass places with a bit of Mod Podge, and again a bit of this, I think it's weeds blend. Just to vary things a little bit, make it look a bit more like weeds growing out. And then just from a distance, a bit of hairspray. I've tested it actually, although it makes it dark when you put it on, it does actually dry matte. So at the bottom of the cliff, I've had this sort of like piled up talus and ballast, but I've never been quite happy with the transition between that and the base here. So I've just been experimenting, and I've got a bit of the Woodland Scenics fine turf. I'm just sprinkling that around at the bottom. I'm blending it in. And then using this fine feather brush just to work it in. You see some of this talus is still quite loose in places. It's a bit naked there. And then starting from a distance, because if you go up too close with your hairspray, it just blows it all away. So once the first distance squirts are in, you can go a bit closer. And then before it dries, this is just Woodland Scenics fine turf. Just little patches, just to make it look a little bit sort of mossy. A Again, bit of a spray to hold it in place. That's blending in, it's looking much more realistic. And then once that's done, I'll go around and put a few little patches of grass and weeds in amongst it as well. Right, finally, to blend this in a bit more, I'm just going to mix in a little bit. This is the dark grey grout that I've used as ballast in the yard area. I've got a little tub of it here, just using a paintbrush, just dabbing it on in the transition area between the rock fall and the ballast area. So just dabbing that on like that, and then again a bit of hairspray will hold it in place. It's looking quite dark now, that will dry much lighter. This is the area that's had a chance to dry and it looks much more blended in, much more what I'm after. So we've got our fence down and a base layer of green and grass over the back of the layout. I'm going to leave it there for this video. I'm going to come back in another video and we'll just make that greenery pop with some bushes and a little bit of colour, and finish that back layer off. So don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.